starts with the defending NBA champions, the Milwaukee Bucks. We travel to the Midwest to open up the NBA's 75th anniversary. The Milwaukee Bucks played host to the Brooklyn Nets, the defending basketball champions, taking on the team that was the preseason favorite to win the NBA title potentially this season. The Bucks unveiled their championship banner for the first time in over 50 years. Oscar Robertson and Kareem Abdul-Jabbar accomplished the championship for the Bucks in 1971. They received their rings, and obviously the Bucks, deservedly so, were basking in the NBA sunlight. They deserved all the attention. It was a tremendous accomplishment for them last season. And the interesting thing about sports, and we've talked about this all the time, is how things can change from one season to the next. Not in terms of which teams are going to have certain records, but as far as the actual play of specific players, right? In the NFL, we see this all the time. One season, Carson Wentz is an MVP candidate and an MVP frontrunner, and 2 years later, we look at him in a totally different perspective. He's having a difficult time just being traded out of Philly for the Colts. They almost had to beg teams to take him, right? And what happened last year, what the finals unlocked, was a different version of Giannis Antetokounmpo that we hadn't seen before. Because what last year's finals unlocked to us as NBA fans was a much more intelligent, was a much more acutely aware Giannis Antetokounmpo of what his strengths are and what he needs to do to succeed. Last year, finally, Giannis played the most intelligent type of basketball that he'd ever played in his career because he understood, I have the advantage inside almost every single time. I'm going to bully my way to the rim. I'm going to dominate the postseason and be in control. And what we saw in the finals, and especially in Game 6, perhaps one of the greatest finals performances ever. 50 points, 14 rebounds, 5 blocks, 2 assists, 17 for 19 from the free throw line in 42 minutes, was a guy completely aware of what his strengths are. He tied Bob Pettit for the most points in an NBA Finals clinching game. Bob Pettit did it in 1958. But what we raved about with Giannis was the fact that here's a guy who never shied away from the free throw line. Even though he was struggling throughout the entire season, he came right back. He continued to relentlessly attack the rim, and he wasn't always settling for the outside shot, wasn't always settling for the three-pointer. Instead, was posting you up, and even though the defense knew he was going to drive it to the rim, it didn't derail him. Didn't deter him whatsoever. And on opening night last night, what we saw is Giannis building on what he learned from last postseason. Because he comes out, drops 32 points, 14 rebounds, 7 assists, a tremendous performance, 2 blocks, 7 for 9 from the free throw line, plus 25. He was doubling down on what those strengths were from a season ago. A guy that's going to relentlessly attack the rim. And the problem that people had with him before he won the title was they almost wanted to convert him into Cade 2.0. And he said, you know what? That's not who I am. That's not my game. Where I'm at my best is when I'm attacking the rim, when I'm going for layups, when I'm rolling to the basket. And every offseason, I'll continue to work on these other aspects of the game, but that's not what makes me unique. And that was the problem that people had. And those were the only question marks about his game. And instead, from last postseason on through already the first game of this new 2021-2022 campaign, we're seeing how much Giannis has learned from that experience from last year. We're seeing him fully aware of what makes him unique. And I was extremely impressed with him and the Bucks, especially the fact that Jrue Holiday had to leave pretty early on with a concussion. They basked in the glory. They backed it up. And the one thing I'm not worried about this Bucks team led by Giannis is any form of complacency. What this guy had to go through just to get to the NBA, complacency isn't in his DNA. This is not someone who is going to rest on his laurels and be satisfied with one championship. This is an ultra competitive guy who understands that while all these other teams around him may be forming super teams and may come in with a chip on their shoulder, it's not going to be a bigger chip than his own. Growing up essentially in an impoverished community in Athens with his brothers, in like a hovel, essentially, didn't have his own room, amongst many other things. This guy's not going to get complacent. And they came out and they made a statement that the Bucks are for real once again, and it was great to see in the NBA. But on the flip side, all I could think about, and I apologize if fans don't really want to be hearing this, all I could think about was Kyrie Irving's absence last night. Because to be honest, I wasn't expecting to feel it quite as much as I did, but it was undeniable. It was extremely noticeable, Kyrie Irving's absence from the team yesterday for the Brooklyn Nets, because they lost 127-104. And there were several stretches in the game where it really even wasn't that close for the majority of the game in the second half. KD was obviously sensational, as he always is going to be. Paced the team with 32 points, over 50% shooting. That's what he does. To be honest, I thought Patty Mills played an incredible game, 21 points off the bench. I really liked that acquisition. I was hoping the Lakers could have acquired him. I know there were discussions there, but he ultimately joined the Nets. That was a huge pickup for them. But my kind of concern yesterday had more to do with James Harden, to be honest. Yes, he had 20 points. He had 8 rebounds, 8 assists. But if you look at his production in the second half, the production in the second half just wasn't quite there. He had 3 turnovers and 5 points on 1 for 3 shooting in the second half. He had 1 turnover and no shot attempts in the fourth quarter. Now, he did dish out 5 assists, so I do like that he's a facilitator. He's always been a genius with the basketball from that perspective. But no shots in the fourth quarter for James Harden. That can't be. They need him, especially if Kyrie isn't going to play or be a part of the team. They need him to also be that scorer just as much as he is a facilitator. And it was surprising to me that down the stretch, he didn't attempt any shots in the fourth quarter. That's just an uncharacteristic decision by a guy who, yes, he doesn't play. He plays unselfishly, but they need him to be a scorer. And KD needed him to chip in just as much on the scoring front as he was on the assist front. But again, I just continue to find myself almost angered and further frustrated and disappointed that Kyrie Irving isn't there. Because you do wonder, well, how has that impacted the team so far? The body language of the Nets, not that they look deflated, but they almost look frustrated that a third of our big three isn't here. That just seemed to be apparent watching this team. And especially down the stretch, you were seeing how much they were struggling offensively. Now you understand why. Kyrie Irving is one of the best closers and one of the best late game finishers in NBA history. He's a clutch player. He's an extreme offensive weapon that they didn't have, quite frankly. They just didn't have. And so I hope that Kyrie Irving was watching this game yesterday and saying to himself, okay, enough is enough. I get it. It's a personal decision. Everyone has the right and is entitled to do what's in the best interest of them. And Kyrie Irving shouldn't be forced to inject something into his body that he's not comfortable with. But at the end of the day, this team needs you. And I don't think that the Brooklyn Nets are going to be the favorites if he's not there. They're still a title contender. But I don't know if they're going to be the favorites to win the NBA, let alone coming out of the Eastern Conference. I don't know if they're going to be the favorites over the Milwaukee Bucks without Kyrie Irving. So those were kind of the big takeaways from last night's matchup. But I was overall impressed with the Bucks and especially with Giannis. He also did it defensively. He had another great block on Nick Claxton, reminded me of the 2 sensational blocks that he had in the NBA Finals against DeAndre Ayton. In Game 4, we remember that recovery block up by 2 with 1:15 left in Game 4, and he had a chase down block in Game 2 against on Mikal Bridges. He had another one last night against Nick Claxton. So he was sensational.